According to the South African Demographic and Health Survey, nearly 70% of women and 31% of men in South Africa are overweight or obese. Now, this growing health concern is influenced by more than just diet. And today we're joined by Dr. Manoj Bagwadeen, who will provide expert insights into the complexities of obesity. Doc, good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for coming through.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me back on the show.
It's a pleasure. Let's start at the beginning. How do we go about classifying obesity, and when does it become a medical concern?
What we first need to understand is that obesity is basically a technical term. It's really a ratio of one's height relative to one's weight. This is just a figure, basically, right? And there are certain ranges, and if one's so-called body mass index, which is a proportion of these two figures that I told you about, is above a figure of 30, you are technically classified as obese. It's not that simple, though. What you need to understand is that, as an example, let's take a bodybuilding athlete. He may be a bit shorter, but his weight will be quite high because of his excessive muscle mass.
Yeah.
And if you just look at that criteria, this person is actually obese, but he's not. So we've got to take other criteria into account. And this is things like body fat percentage, one's waist to hip ratio, and certain other criteria. So it's vitally important to understand that obesity is not just a figure. It has to be associated with an overall medical or clinical assessment that determines other factors which will then determine whether you are actually obese or not.
Can we expand a little bit on that in terms of, the various criterias that are used in determining obesity?
So obesity, you'll find, is, like I said, linked primarily to what's called body mass index.
Yeah.
Right? And if your
BMI,
basically. So if your figure is 30 or above, you fall into the obese category. And once you're in the obese category, there's three different subcategories. We call it class 1, 2, or 3, or moderate obesity, severe obesity, or morbid obesity. And this is dependent on what the figure is above 30. And thereafter, all the risk factors come into play.
Now, in South Africa, right, we're known to be a bit more fuller-figured. We have a diversity of body types, and we celebrate all of them. But at what point does body positivity sort of hamper and hinder on what could be obesity?
South Africa, we've got to be very sensitive to cultural perceptions, cultural differences, etc. But to a point where we need to realize that this is now becoming a problem. And this is where, when the associated medical and health factors or health risks become prominent. So I think it's absolutely essential that our communities become educated and made more aware that, yes, being overweight or slightly bigger in stature may be perceived as a healthy, beautiful thing, but there are risk factors that are associated, especially when it becomes excessive, when you start to get into the obese category. And this does have a significant impact, not just on the individual, but on communities and the nation as a whole, especially with regards to the burden of healthcare in South Africa. And we know that's not one of our fortes, really.
What conversations are we meant to be having in our communities to say this is no longer just about a cultural perception or a cultural norm of what is a beautiful physique, but we're now straddling on real health issues?
I think this conversation has got to start really early. We've got to start it with our kids. First and foremost, I think it's got to do with the examples that we set, whether as parents, leaders, community leaders, teachers, political leaders. We've got to start to set a good example. Secondly, the message has got to go out there that there is a way to live your life that is healthy, that will in the long term gain you far more benefits than you would have enjoyed had you not followed a healthy lifestyle, especially with regards to obesity and all the chronic conditions that go with this, which seriously affect one's quality of life and one's lifespan. So, I think when you put it into that perspective, it makes it a little more personal to the patient with regards to improving your quality of life, as opposed to just following, let's call it, cultural or traditional practices and role models which could not have the best outcome on your life and quality of life.
So in our country, we know there's a multitude of challenges that people have to face. When we talk obesity and health, people will talk to you about accessibility, affordability of food, for instance, and healthy lifestyles. How do we begin to have these conversations in a way that's more positive and in a way that impacts a more positive outcomes?
This has got to be instilled in our children from parents, teachers, leaders, influencers, etc. And it's got to become a very much a part of our lives. Then the choices that we make has got to be reviewed. You know, it's quite easy to make excuses. Healthier options are generally a little more expensive, but not beyond the reach. As an example, communities can start their own food gardens. They can buy in bulk and share, the benefits of the cost savings that will give you the benefits that we're all hoping for in the long run.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I've got a little veggie patch myself.
Excellent. I wish a lot more people would actually follow that example. It's something we've moved away from, unfortunately.
No, that's so true. Dr. Bagwadeen, thank you so much, as always, for your expertise. It's been most enlightening.
Thank you.
This has been a truly insightful conversation, helping us understand the many factors behind obesity in South Africa. Stay tuned for more with Dr. Bagwadeen a bit later on in the show.